You can't build sustainable success without really caring and really focusing on and obsessing over the customer.
Welcome to Making Things Click, a limited 5-part series that dives into the core ideas of the new book, Click. Join author John Zeratsky as he walks you through the Foundation Sprint, a proven 2-day method to kickstart projects and align them with what customers really want. John is a co-founder and general partner at venture capital firm Character Capital, best-selling author of Sprint and Make Time, and former design partner at Google Ventures. In this second episode, John emphasizes why understanding your customers, identifying your unique team advantages, and defining your competitors are critical steps to building something that truly clicks.
Focusing on these basics can be uncomfortable. It's like shining a very, very bright light on something for the first time.
If you're new to the series, make sure to check out the first episode where John introduces the Foundation Sprint.
I remember building a marketplace, a product maybe a decade ago. And then I went to meet a slightly more experienced entrepreneur. And then when me and my co-founder met him, the first thing that he asked me is like, whose problem are you trying to solve? One, we were very startled, and then we couldn't really answer it well. And he kept repeating the same thing. Whose problem are you trying to solve? So the obvious stuff is not always obvious. I think this is often very, very true, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, given that it's very difficult sometimes to figure out who your customers are and what is the exact problem that you're trying to solve. Why does this always happen more often than not?
I think this happens for two reasons. One is that it's just not our natural way of thinking. The natural human tendency is to focus on solutions, to say, hey, I think this would be cool, or I think this seems valuable or needed in the world, and then to make it and see if it works. That's how humans have operated for thousands and thousands of years. Behind that impulse, behind that idea, that inspiration, is some set of assumptions. And so what we want to do in the Foundation Sprint is make those really clear, but it's a little bit of an unnatural way of thinking. And so we provide very specific techniques and exercises to take a team through something that can otherwise be a little bit difficult. The second reason is that it's just kind of uncomfortable. People focusing on these basics, hearing a question from somebody that you admire, that you look up to, like, whose problem are you actually trying to solve here? It can be uncomfortable. It's like shining a very, very bright light on something for the first time. And so instinctively, we tend to avoid those conversations. Those of us on the team, we avoid it. The other people who maybe are helping out avoid it. Jake says in the book that when he first started working with founders, he was afraid to ask basic questions. He was afraid to ask about those obvious things because he didn't want to appear naive. And so everybody around these conversations feels a little bit uncomfortable. And as a result, more often than not, we just ignore them altogether. We focus on the fun part, which is building something. But as a result, we're doing ourselves a disservice. We are setting ourselves up for failure instead of success.
We also tend not to focus on the customer. This is a message that's repeated in the book Click as well. We focus on what we want rather than what we can do for the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super common, and I think it happens for the same reasons as why we ignore the obvious, which is that we build things that intuitively seem valuable to us, and because it's uncomfortable to go out and talk to people, to put ourselves out there, to have the chance of being wrong, to put some unfinished work in front of them and get negative feedback. The whole process can be uncomfortable. But it's really, really important if you want to build a product that works.
Even in the book, you guys say that it's hard to make a product click if you don't care about the person it's supposed to click with.
Yeah.
But have you come across any exception to this rule?
Basically, no. Some teams care in different ways. I think ideally everybody who builds a product would have this very empathetic, sort of deep emotional understanding of what is the day-to-day life and the struggles and the challenges of customers. not all successful founders operating in that way. Sometimes they're very narrowly focused on the problem that they're solving, the specific domain that they're operating in. But we've never worked with a successful company who wasn't just obsessed with the customer, who wasn't just obsessed with the problem that they can solve. Everything flows from that. Now, you can get lucky. You can have some short-term success. Maybe you build something and then you launch it out into the world and you see if anybody likes it. But you can't build sustainable success without really caring and really focusing on and obsessing over the customer.
So you want to figure out who your customers are. What is the problem you're trying to solve? How do you go about doing this?
In the foundation sprint, we use a technique we call note and vote. It's our method for rapid group collaboration and decision making. And we don't try to, bring in a bunch of market research or anything like that into the foundation sprint. We build on the insights and the intuition and the knowledge that's already in the brains of the people in the sprint. We are big believers in intuition. We believe that if you are operating in the world, you've had a set of experiences, you've failed, you've succeeded, you're building up intuition. You're learning all the time. And so what we want to do in a sprint is bring that intuition into the room. Those 5 people, they all have a different set of experiences. And then we believe that our note and vote method allows us to get all those little bits and pieces out of people's brains, write them down. So we work individually, and then use some structured decision-making techniques to look across all those different ideas and pick out the ones that we think are the best. So in this case, who do we think is the most important customer? What do we think is the most important problem that we can solve for them? But we do that through this note and vote method.
So I was reading about this and wondering why all meetings are not held like this. I guess we'll make faster and better decisions if people can do this. Do you have any other best practices that you can share on doing the note and vote method really well?
The thing that works so well about note and vote is that it enables the team to work. We call it working alone together. So you're together as a team, but each person is working on their own to generate ideas and then to vote on the ideas that they think are the most promising. This is really important because our experience shows, and research shows, actual academic research shows, that group brainstorms don't produce the highest quality ideas. They tend to result either in groupthink, where ideas get sort of muddled, consensus, where ideas get watered down, ideas that are decided by one person that other people don't really feel good about. And so we think it's really important for teams to find a structure where they can get the best of those individual brains. Each person has time to think deeply, to contribute their ideas, but then that sort of all rolls up or bubbles up to a crisp decision that the decider can make. And so that's kind of the essence of the note and vote.
So beyond the problem that you're solving and identifying who your customer is, the book says we need to figure out 2 more things for the foundation sprint as basics: your team's unique advantage and your competitors. So what are the unique advantages of the Character Capital team?
We actually ran a foundation sprint for our team a few months ago, and we believe that our most important capability that gives us a unique advantage is the sprint methods that we've created. So the design sprint, the foundation sprint, we have a few other sprint methods that we use. We have designed these specifically to be useful to early stage startups. Those are our customers. We have more experience than probably anybody else in the world running these sprints with this type of customer. And we know that they work. We know that they successfully help companies, build better products, improve their chances of success. We've done that with a lot of really successful companies over the past 10, 15 years. So that's our unique capabilities. We have this sprint method and we have more experience than anybody else using it.
Yeah. So what if you don't look at the unique advantages of your team members? What happens?
If you don't identify the unique advantages of your team, you are more likely to build a solution that's either not differentiated from the competition because, it's just sort of, you're less focused on what you can uniquely bring into the world. You're just sort of looking at what exists, out there, and maybe copying or parroting what you see. And also, I think that you set yourselves up for failure. You start, but you can't win. So an example of this would be a startup competing against a big company. Big companies have unique advantages. They have scale, they have distribution, they have massive resources. They can spend a lot of money on things. When startups try to compete head to head with those companies, they usually fail. But when startups find a way to play a different game, they focus on things that they're uniquely good at, they work around the edges, that's when they can find success. Then they can leverage that success to take on something bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually they can become a formidable competitor to those big companies.
So, to identify your unique advantage, you should consider your team's unique capabilities, insights, and motivation, right? But I guess we generally don't pay enough attention to motivation. For example, if you read through an investment memo from most VCs and look at the section that assesses the team, there would be a lot of diligence on the capabilities of the team and not so much on the team's motivations. Why is that?
That's interesting. It is something that we look at. So we have a scorecard that we use when we evaluate startups for investment at Character. And it consists of approximately 25 criteria that we go through and we score them. And then that rolls up to an overall score. And one of the criteria is authentic interest or motivation. Why is this team interested? Does it feel like that motivation aligns with what they really care about? The reason that we think this is so important is that it's the engine that continues to drive that team forward, even when things get really hard. I think when you see teams that don't have a strong sense of motivation for solving the problem that they're focused on, they tend to be easily distractible. They pivot a million times. They'll jump at something that's, a little bit shiny, that's off in the periphery of their view. And we know that building a startup is very, very hard. Things don't always go well. There are really challenging periods. And so what we have found is that the teams that have a really clear sense of why they're doing it, why they're spending their time on that one problem, that one customer, they're more likely to keep going, to take stock and restart and go again, and not get distracted, not just get discouraged, and not quit before they've really given this opportunity a proper try.
So, as an entrepreneur in the past, my tendency generally is to dismiss or maybe underestimate competitors.
Yeah.
Why is that? I've seen many others also do something similar.
I think it comes from the optimism that all founders have, which is that, they think they have self-confidence, right? You don't start a business, you don't create something new unless you believe that yours is going to be the best. And so I think a lot of founders have a tendency to say, well, nobody else really matters. Like, our solution is going to clearly be the best for customers. But I also think that it's just easier. It's again, going back to that idea of being uncomfortable and spending time on things that just don't inherently make us feel good. It can be scary to focus on competitors. I mean, I know that every time I see, somebody launch a new VC firm, or I see, a new accelerator program launch, or a new resource come out for founders that is competitive to what we're doing at Character, I feel a little bad. I feel a little nervous. I think, oh shoot, like, are we competitive enough with them? And so it can be tempting to just say, ignore the competitors, ignore the noise. And I think to a certain extent, that is very helpful. It's good to not get overly distracted, to not be obsessed with your competitors. But it's very dangerous, because your customers are probably already using something to solve their problem, right? If it's an important problem, they're probably already figuring out a way to solve it, a way to deal with it, a way to live with it. And so you're trying to convince them to switch. You're trying to get their attention and convince them that they should change from what they are doing today, which, it's fine. By definition, it's they're living their life, and try something new. And if you don't know what you're trying to convince them to leave. If you don't know what you're competing against, I think it's much harder to make a compelling pitch to them that they should try something new. The reason we do competitors, we focus on competitors in the basics, the first part of the foundation sprint, is that it sets us up really well for differentiation, which is the second big component that we'll talk about.
What are the basic methods using which you can figure out your competitors? So one is like you look for direct competitors. Maybe you look for indirect competitors, as in like what are the substitutes that people use? Is there anything else to consider?
Yeah, those are the main ones. So direct competitors, these are usually the companies that you already know about. Your customers may or may not know about them. It depends on how big they are, but they're basically companies that do the same thing that you do. The second one that you mentioned is really super important, and this is often what you encounter when you're building something that is really fresh. So in those situations where customers have an important problem, but they're not happy, they're dissatisfied with the solution. That's usually when they're using some type of workaround or substitute. They don't have a perfect solution to it already, and that creates the opportunity. You should also be aware that sometimes there are no competitors, and what your customers are doing is they're currently not solving this problem. This is very rare. This rarely happens, and it's the most risky. We have seen with portfolio companies, sometimes that fails. Sometimes it means that was not a very important problem for your customer. Sometimes it can work really well, but it's a high risk strategy to go into a problem area where there aren't really any competitors or workarounds. The final thing that we encourage teams to do when they're identifying competitors is, out of all those different competitors, identify what we call the 800-pound gorilla. So the big one, the scary one, the one that has the most resources. So for example, when we worked with Slack, they were competing with email, right? So it's not like they weren't competing with some other chat product. There were others on the market, but that wasn't the most important, the most formidable competition. The most formidable competition was email. All their customers were already using email. Email worked fine. They'd been running their businesses on email for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever. And so that was the competitor that they focused on. And almost every business has one of those 800-pound gorillas. We think it's really important to identify that and focus on that competitor, because it's what you're going to have to, convince your customers to move away from.
Yeah. To summarize, obvious things are not obvious. So it helps if you can spend some time understanding who your customers really are, what is your advantage as a team, and also figure out your competition before you start figuring out the rest of the things.
Don't miss the next episode of Making Things Click, where John shares insights on how to make your product truly stand out by not just creating something different, but also by communicating that differentiation effectively to your customers.